The sun wasn't a star, it was a hammer. It slammed down on Ilara's skull with every staggering step. Her lips were cracked and peeling road maps of pain, and her throat felt like she'd swallowed a fistful of sand. Every breath was fire. Before her, the world shimmered, a hazy mirage of heat and hopelessness. She was nothing, less than nothing. A piece of trash tossed out into the wastes, left to be scoured away by the wind. Deep down, she knew the truth. This was the end she deserved. Failed us. Shame. Worthless Omega. The whispers came on the hot wind, slithering into her mind like snakes. They weren't her thoughts. Not anymore. For months, they had been her constant companions, a chorus of ghosts recounting sorrows she'd never lived and deaths she'd never seen. They were the symphony of her decay, the proof that she was broken beyond repair. Her only goal, her only reason for still putting one foot in front of the other, was the thorny, skeletal bush she saw 100 yards away. Shade. It was a pathetic prize, but it was the only one left in her world. Maybe it was fate that she tripped. Her ankle twisted on a loose rock, and she went down hard, the impact jarring the air from her lungs in a pathetic puff of dust. Weak. Always so weak. Can't even stand. "Shut up," she rasped, the words scraping her throat raw. She didn't know what scared her more, the voices that weren't hers or the gnawing emptiness that was. She crawled the last few feet. With every heartbeat, the effort grew larger, more monumental. Her fingers, raw and bleeding, finally clawed at the thin, thorny branches of the bush. The shade was a lie. It was a threadbare patch of relief that did nothing to stop the sun's assault. Still, she slumped beneath it, her body screaming for water, for release, for an end. The whispers swirled, louder now, a vortex of misery threatening to pull her under for the last time. He never loved you. A means to an end. Should have died with the others. That silver dagger. A silver dagger? What did that mean? No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make sense of the fragments. They were just noise, pain, proof of her madness. Her eyes fluttered shut, ready to give in, ready to let the sun and the whispers peel her apart layer by layer. But then a new voice cut through the chaos. It wasn't a memory of sorrow. It was sharp, clear, and filled with a venom that felt sickeningly familiar. Lyra. In that moment, her eyes snapped open. The name wasn't a random sorrow. It was a name she knew, a name she'd tried to forget. As if pulled by a string, a jolt of pure, cold adrenaline shot through her, a feeling so alien after months of numbness that it felt like being struck by lightning. The shock of it, the recognition, was a fresh new kind of torment. What's worse, the single, clear name was somehow more terrifying than all the jumbled chaos that had come before it. Why that name? Why now? The question echoed in the sudden silence of her mind, a silence that was more deafening than the noise it replaced. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the air was cold. It was a damp, ancient chill that clung to the stone walls of the Lycanus stronghold, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather, and everything to do with the silence gripping the throne room. Alpha King Kael sat on his throne, a brutal thing of carved obsidian and petrified wood, and listened to the grim report from his head healer, a she-wolf named Anya, whose face was etched with a sorrow that mirrored his own. Her voice was low, but it carried in the oppressive quiet. 3 more this morning, Alpha King, she said, her hands twisting in the fabric of her robes. Jorik's youngest son and the twin daughters of the Border Patrol captain. They just stopped. The lethargy took them in their sleep. Their life force. It's like a candle flame being slowly pinched out. Kael's hands clenched into fists on the arms of his throne, the only outward sign of the cold fury icing his veins. His knuckles were white mountains on a landscape of rage. He was an alpha, a king. An enemy was something to be met with fang and claw. A threat was something to be torn apart. But this was a ghost, a creeping, silent plague that stole the young, leaving their bodies unmarked but their spirits hollowed out. He hated this helplessness, because an alpha was meant to act. His council, a group of grim-faced senior wolves, stood before him. "We must isolate them," one of them, a grizzled beta named Valerius, urged. His voice was rough, pragmatic. "The sickness spreads through proximity. It has to be. We build a quarantine ward at the far edge of the territory. We send the afflicted there. It is the only way to protect the rest of the pack." "Protect them?" Kael's voice was a low growl, a dangerous rumble that made the very stones seem to vibrate. The sound was quiet, yet it silenced Valerius instantly. "You mean abandon them? You mean we should throw our sick out to die alone because we are too weak to find a cure? Is that the strength of the Lycanus pack, Valerius? To cut off its own limbs because of a splinter?" Valerius bowed his head. "Of course not, Alpha. But what else can we do? We are fighting smoke." Truth be told, Kael had no answer, and that was what fueled his rage. More importantly, it was a direct challenge to his authority, a weakness he could not afford to show. He remembered his father telling him a story once about a great famine that had struck the pack generations ago. His ancestor hadn't hoarded the food. He had starved with his people, and because of that, they had found the will to survive together. Was he any less of a king? Before he could answer, the great wooden doors to the throne room swung open. A scout captain, breathless and mud-splattered, strode in and knelt. "Alpha King," the scout panted, his eyes wide with something Kael couldn't read. Urgency? Confusion? "We were on patrol near the Lunaris border, in the Unforgiving Lands. We found something." Kael leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing into slits. The air thickened. "What did you find?" The scout swallowed hard. "A woman, Alpha, an Omega by her scent. She's unconscious, but that's not it." He hesitated, as if the words themselves were dangerous. "She has the sickness. We can feel it on her. The same dimming life force. The same scent of ozone and decay. She's Lunaris, but she carries our plague." That night, the hammer of the sun was replaced by the anvil of the cold. Alara surfaced from a dark, dreamless state, her body shivering uncontrollably. The moon was a sliver of bone in a black sky, offering no warmth, only a pale, ghostly light. The whispers were gone. The silence left behind was terrifying, a vacuum waiting to be filled. And then it was. Without warning, it wasn't a whisper that entered her mind. It was a vision. Her world tilted. It wasn't a memory or a fleeting thought, it was real. So real she could smell the damp earth and the metallic tang of old blood. A crumbling stone shrine, covered in moss and decay, rose up from the floor of a dark cavern. In the center of the shrine, on a stone altar, lay a dagger. It was beautiful and terrible. The hilt a dark, gnarled wood, the blade an ornate, swirling pattern of black steel that seemed to drink the light. As if the world narrowed, the vision zoomed in. She saw the dagger plunged deep into the heart of a great, magnificent wolf, a creature of midnight fur and eyes like molten gold. The wolf didn't cry out. It simply fell, its life dimming like a dying star. And standing over it, holding the dagger, was a face she knew. The vision was so intense, so overpowering, that a hot, wet trickle suddenly streamed from her nose. She lifted a trembling hand to her face and her fingers came away slick with blood. Her body moved on instinct. A scream tried to tear its way out of her throat, but it died as a strangled gasp. She was losing her mind. This was it. The final, complete shattering of her sanity. The sickness wasn't just whispers anymore. It was showing her horrors, which meant she was a danger to anyone who might find her. The thought was her last coherent one. Utterly spent, her energy drained by the psychic violence of the vision, her body gave up. Her head swam in a dizzying vortex of blackness and she collapsed, sinking into true, deep unconsciousness. As the silence roared and her vision faded to black, the last thing she saw was a pair of massive, mud-caked leather boots stopping inches from her face. A shadow fell over her, impossibly large, blotting out the sliver of moon. It was the shadow of a man, and something more. The shadow of a wolf, looming over her like a mountain. Her world didn't just tilt, and just like that, everything changed. He had claimed her. A public display of ownership, a declaration that felt more like a brand seared into her soul than a promise of protection. The unforgiving desert sun, a tyrant that had ruled her life, was gone. In its place, a chill wind nipped at Alara's bare skin. Her mind, a jumbled mess of anguish and terror, slowly pieced together what had happened. She had collapsed. The whispers, the vision, the shadow of the wolf. And now, this. The rough, leathery scent of a male Lycanus. The enemy. She was not a ghost. She was a prisoner. Her body, however, refused to obey, still lost in the deep sleep of exhaustion and sickness. Before she could move, strong hands, calloused and firm, lifted her, the motion jostling her back to a state of hazy awareness. Her head lolled. The world swam into view, a patchwork of rugged faces under the cold moonlight. They were warriors, Lycanus warriors. As if summoned, a low growl rippled through the group. "Kill her! She's a trespassing Omega! An enemy!" a voice commanded, thick with disdain. Her breath caught. The words were sharp, final. This was it. This was the end. But then, a new voice cut through the tension. Calm, reasoned. "Wait." It was the second in command, a man with a heavy frown and weary eyes. He knelt, his gaze sweeping over her. He saw not a trespasser, but the same sickness that was slowly devouring his own sister. The silvery sheen on her skin. The faint smell of ozone. He saw the truth, because he had seen it before. "She's afflicted. She has the plague," he said, his voice softer now. "Killing her won't stop this." The patrol captain snorted. "An act of war. A Lunaris curse." "Maybe," the other warrior mused. "Or perhaps she's a symptom, not the source. The Alpha King will want to know about this." And just like that, everything changed. Alara was not killed. She was a specimen, a puzzle to be solved. They carried her, her body feeling like a worthless piece of luggage. She was being taken from the desert, from her miserable freedom, and into the heart of the stronghold. She didn't know what scared her more, the prospect of death or this strange new fate. Her world tilted as they moved. The whispers, which had been a low hum, suddenly surged, a chaotic symphony of grief and sorrow. A hook was set, a deep, unsettling question. Why did her suffering connect to theirs? With every heartbeat, Alara's consciousness returned in jarring bursts. She awoke not to the punishing sand, but to the softness of a silken sheet against her skin. It was a cruel comfort, a stark contrast to the barren stone walls of the chamber. A window, small and barred, looked out onto a courtyard, not the endless sky. She was clean, her raw skin soothed, and her throat no longer a desert. But the guards outside her door, the heavy sense of confinement, it was clear she was no guest. This was a cage, more luxurious than her old one, yet still a cage. She was a prisoner, because her very existence was a mystery they couldn't ignore. A beat later, the door groaned open. Her heart leapt into her throat. Alpha King Kael entered. He was more imposing up close than she'd imagined. His silver eyes were like chips of ice, examining her with a cold, detached curiosity. He smelled of power and an ancient grief. He was a force of nature, a predator with a crown. "You carry the plague," he stated, not asked. The words were a low growl, a rumble that settled deep in her bones. "My pack is dying because of it." Her breath caught. She tried to sit up, but the lingering sickness made her head swim. "I'm not a curse, I'm a victim," she choked out, the old terror giving way to a spark of defiance. Kyle didn't react. He simply moved closer, his shadow falling over her. "The visions you suffer, my people see them too, the deaths, the sorrows, but yours are different." They lead somewhere. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. The whispers led to you. Now you will lead me to the source. In that moment, a new wave of whispers hit her. Not the chaotic ones, but a clear, commanding voice. Find the dagger. Find the shrine. It was the vision from the desert, the one that had made her bleed. She winced, clamping her eyes shut against the pain. Kyle saw her reaction. He didn't offer a hand or a word of comfort. Instead, he simply watched, his silver eyes cold and analytical. Cooperate. Tell me what you see, or die, having been a useless symbol of our failure. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned, the heavy bolt sliding shut with a resounding clang that seemed to echo her imprisonment. The sound was a hook, a question hanging in the air. Was she a tool for his pack, or was she a key to her own salvation? The air in the High Council Hall was heavy, thick with the scent of anger and fear. Elara stood before them, a small, trembling figure in the center of a pack of hostile Lycanus warriors. They were a sea of growls and snarls, their eyes burning with hatred. They saw a Lunaris Omega, a witch, a bringer of plague. They saw their dying children and their fading mates, and they blamed her. Without warning, a powerful beta warrior, Vorlag, stepped forward, his face a mask of undiluted rage. Kill the witch! She's a poison in our halls, an enemy sent to weaken us. His words were a match to tinder. The shouts grew louder. The tension in the room was a tangible thing, a coiled snake ready to strike. The stakes were high because Kael had staked his own reputation on her. He had to stop them. As if fate demanded it, Kael's voice ripped through the room, a roar of pure alpha power that silenced the crowd instantly. Enough! The silence was deafening. Kyle stalked to her side, his presence a shield, though his touch was cold and impersonal. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a political gesture more than a comforting one. She is under my protection, he declared, his gaze sweeping over the council with a challenge. She is not an enemy. She is our last hope for a cure. Not only that, he went on, I have claimed her. She is a part of this pack now. The words were a dagger, sharp and shocking. Elara's breath hitched. Claimed? It was a term of ownership, of a deep, sacred bond. But there was no romance in his voice, only cold, hard power. He had claimed her to protect his investment, to silence his dissenters. He was a master tactician, and she was the pawn. A growl rose in her throat, an involuntary, instinctual response to the word claimed. It wasn't a mating call. It was a growl of caged defiance, because even in her fear she knew she was no one's possession. As the tension broke, she caught Vorlag's eye. His hatred hadn't faded. It had just been contained. He looked at her not with anger anymore, but with a simmering, dangerous promise of revenge. He saw her as a plague and now a symbol of his alpha's folly. He was a new hook, a new subplot. And just like that, Elara knew her gilded cage was more dangerous than the desert. The scene concluded with this thought, setting the stage for her new reality and her journey into the treacherous world of the Lycanus stronghold. The chamber was a prison, but not a dark, dank one. It was a gilded cage. Elara sat on the edge of a bed dressed in silk, a stark contrast to the coarse desert sand she had called home for weeks. Her body was clean, her stomach full for the first time in what felt like forever. She hated it. The comfort felt wrong, a trick, a prelude to some unseen punishment. The heavy stone walls were a constant weight, a silent testament to her captivity. But her true prison wasn't the room itself. It was the venomous glares from the Lycanus servants. She was a ghost in their halls, and her every move was watched. She could practically feel their hatred, a cold, prickly sensation on her skin. She was walking down a hallway, escorted by two grim-faced guards when she heard it. The low murmurs of two other guards, their voices sharp with disdain. Lunaris witch, one of them spat, his voice thick with contempt, brought the plague upon us. The Alpha King's a fool for keeping her alive, the other muttered back. Elara's heart sank. She wasn't an asset. Not to them. She was a disease they kept caged, a thing to be endured. She was a contamination. And just like that, her deepest misbelief was reinforced. She was worthless, doomed. A pawn in a game she didn't understand. A monster in the eyes of everyone she met. She had survived the desert only to be condemned here. Her survival depended on Kael, the man who saw her as a tool, and on her ability to navigate this treacherous landscape of hatred. She had to be invisible, to not make a single misstep. The thought was a stone in her gut. She reached her chambers and the door opened. Kael was already there, a silent specter in the corner. He tossed a sketchbook and a stick of charcoal onto her bed. Her heart skipped a beat. A beat later, he spoke, his voice low and commanding. "Try again," he said, his eyes a cold, unwavering focus. "Give me something useful." His face was a mask of cold resolve. She felt a flicker of defiance, a small, tiny spark of fire in the pit of her stomach. She wouldn't just survive. She would prove him wrong. She would prove all of them wrong. She would prove that she was not just a contamination, a worthless burden. The charcoal felt foreign in her hand, rough against her skin. Elara sat hunched over the sketchbook, a silent, defiant figure. Kael's presence in the room was a heavy weight, a constant pressure that made her skin crawl. He paced, his boots on the stone floor a relentless rhythm that echoed her frantic heartbeat. "Focus," he commanded, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the air. "Control the whispers." She closed her eyes, trying to block out the world, to find some semblance of order in the chaos in her mind. The whispers were a jumbled mess of grief and fear, 1,000 different voices crying out at once. It was a storm inside her, a hurricane of anguish. She tried to push through the noise, to find a pattern, a coherent thought, but his intimidating presence and her own fear were a wall. Her mind was a fortress, and the whispers were its siege. "Nothing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The word tasted like ash. She failed. She was a failure. Kael's patience, a thin veneer to begin with, snapped. He let out a frustrated growl, a sound that made her jump. "My pack is dying. Do not waste my time again." He left in a huff, the door slamming shut behind him, the sound echoing her humiliation. She was not just a failure in her own mind, she was a failure in his. Her worthlessness was proven, a cold, hard truth she couldn't escape. Her hope, a fragile, nascent thing, crumbled to dust. She was a disappointment, a useless specimen who couldn't even perform her one task. The silence in the room was deafening, a roaring emptiness that swallowed her whole. A deep ache settled in her chest, a profound sense of loneliness. She was alone, trapped, and utterly useless. Elara was alone in her chambers, the sketchbook a silent challenge on her bed. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a failure, a burden. A sliver of defiance sparked in her, a tiny, defiant ember in the darkness of her despair. She would prove him wrong. She would prove herself wrong. She would prove that she was not just a contamination, a worthless burden. She closed her eyes, not to block out the whispers, but to listen to them. She recalled the vivid vision from the desert, the intricate details of the dagger and the shrine. She focused not on the voices, but on the feeling behind them, the emotion, the intent. She channeled her fear into a fierce, unwavering focus. With a newfound resolve, she pushed through the noise, her charcoal stick moving with a frantic, artistic energy. The images she had seen, the ornate dagger and the crumbling shrine, took shape on the page, clear and precise. This was her first small success, a step from being a passive victim to an active participant. She had produced something tangible, something real, something that might save her. The charcoal felt rough in her hand. Elara's world had shrunk to the blank page before her. The whispers in her head were a chaotic, tormenting storm, but she refused to let them win. A tiny ember of defiance flickered in her chest, a desperate need to prove her worth. To him, to them, to herself. She was not a worthless burden. She wouldn't be. Not anymore. As if fate demanded it, she closed her eyes, not to shut out the whispers, but to listen to them. She reached back into her memory, to the vivid, terrifying vision from the desert, the ornate dagger, the crumbling shrine. She focused on the feeling behind the voices, the raw emotion. It was like trying to catch a single drop of water in a torrential downpour, but she was a survivor. She was a fighter. She channeled her fear into a fierce, unwavering focus. With a newfound resolve, she pushed through the noise, her charcoal stick moving with a frantic, artistic energy. The images she had seen, the ornate dagger and the crumbling shrine, took shape on the page, clear and precise. She had produced something tangible, something real. With every heartbeat, she felt her power grow. She was a passive victim no longer. She was an active participant. Her hands, once trembling with fear, were now steady, sure. She left the drawing on her bed for Kael to find, a silent act of compliance and defiance. A message. I'm not just a prisoner. I'm a key. The drawing was a silent plea, a desperate hope that he would see her not as a tool, but as a person. Maybe it was a risk, but what did she have to lose? Kael found the drawing and his world tilted. The ancient shrine, its forbidden name etched in old Lycanus lore, was a place of immense, dangerous power. He was an alpha king who prided himself on logic, on strategy, but this was different. He knew in his gut that Alara wasn't just a random omega. She was something more. He led her to his private library, a chamber filled with ancient scrolls and forgotten knowledge. The scent of old paper and dust filled the air, a scent of history and secrets. He watched her as she moved, a fragile figure in this world of stone and power. He saw her touch a specific scroll case, her fingers tracing the worn carvings, and in that moment, everything changed. A powerful, coherent vision seized her. She saw it all. The whispers coalesced into a single narrative, a scene of betrayal and ambition. She saw an ancient ritual, the dagger, the shrine, and she saw the face of her former pack sister, Lyra. Lyra's face, a mask of ambition and malice, whispered an incantation, and the curse was unleashed. The plague was not an illness, it was a magical curse, and Lyra, the person Alara had trusted, was the orchestrator. The vision ended, leaving Alara in a state of shock, betrayal, and a surge of furious clarity. Her exile, her sickness, her suffering. It was all a deliberate act by someone she trusted, someone she considered family. She looked at Kael, her eyes blazing with a new fire. The space between them burned with a shared understanding. I know who did this, she said, her voice shaking with rage. The words were not a whisper, but a declaration. A promise. Kael's eyes, once cold and guarded, now held a new light. He fully believed her. The evidence was in her drawing, in her eyes, in the very air between them. He no longer saw a specimen. He saw a partner. Their dynamic shifted into a true, albeit reluctant, partnership. They pored over the ancient scrolls together, Kael's pragmatism and her visions working in tandem. He realized that Lyra must be after the dagger, the artifact that had amplified the curse, to control its power. Their goal was no longer just to find a cure, but to break a curse and stop a traitor. The stakes became deeply personal for Alara, and the ticking clock of the plague became even more urgent. They were running out of time. With every heartbeat, another member of his pack could be lost. Kael issued a command to his most trusted scout, a beta warrior named Rylan, the same man who had saved Alara in the desert. Prepare a small party. We ride at dawn, and no one is to know our destination. Rylan, his face a mixture of surprise and resolve, nodded. Yes, Alpha. He looked at Alara, a new respect in his eyes. He saw not a witch, but a key to his sister's survival. He saw not a Lunaris Omega, but a partner to his Alpha. The pack was dying, and this was their last hope. As if the world narrowed, Alara watched them leave. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this journey was their only chance. A single glance at Kyle's face, a look of grim determination, solidified her resolve. They were in this together. The air was a biting knife, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the desert. Alara was out of her gilded cage, but she was in a different kind of prison, a dangerous, unfamiliar wilderness with her former enemies. She rode beside Kyle, the silence between them a living, breathing thing. Her visions, once a maddening torment, were now her compass, a map of betrayal and forgotten power. She was anxious, but a strange sense of freedom, a fierce resolve burned in her chest. She was no longer just a prisoner, a victim. She was an active participant in her own story. The journey was tense. The small, elite team was a silent, grim-faced unit, their focus absolute. They rode through a forest of ancient, gnarled trees, their branches reaching up to the ashen sky like skeletal fingers. Alara was a stranger in this world, but the whispers, now a quiet hum in her mind, guided her. They led her through forgotten trails and over ancient streams. She could feel the power of the land, a deep, resonating hum beneath her feet. Kyle rode beside her, a silent shadow. His presence was a constant, a solid weight in her periphery. She could feel his eyes on her, a probing, analytical gaze. She knew he saw her as a tool, a key to a problem he couldn't solve, but there was a flicker of something more. A question, a curiosity. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Did he see the girl who had been cast out, the girl who had almost died in the desert? Or did he see the woman who had brought his pack's only hope? A storm began to brew on the horizon. The sky darkened, a swirling vortex of gray and purple. The wind shifted, a cold, mournful howl. It mirrored their own uncertain future. What awaited them at the shrine? Would they be able to break the curse? Or would they fall victim to the trap Lyra had set for them? The questions hung in the air unanswered, a tangible weight on her shoulders. The canyon was a desolate place, a narrow crack in the earth carved out by a long-dead river. They sought shelter from the approaching storm, their horses' hooves scraping against the loose rock. The wind howled through the canyon walls, a mournful song that seemed to whisper of betrayal. Without warning, a volley of arrows rained down on them. They were ambushed. The attackers were Lunaris warriors, their faces grim, their intent deadly. It was clear Lyra had sent them to stop Kaelen and Alara. A brutal fight ensued. The air was thick with the scent of blood and ozone, the sound of steel on steel, the furious snarls of shifting wolves. In the chaos, Alara's whispers flared, a sudden, piercing shriek. She saw it. A glint of metal, a sniper aiming at an exposed Kael. His focus was on the warriors in front of him, his back a vulnerable target. Her body moved on instinct. Without thinking, she screamed his name. A beat later, she tackled him to the ground, her body a shield, the arrow flying harmlessly over their heads. The impact was brutal, knocking the wind from her lungs. She was a fragile human against a mountain of muscle, but she had saved him. Her action was instinctive, a primal mix of self-preservation. She needed him alive, and a new, budding, unwanted connection to him. She was shocked by her own actions. She had risked her life for a man who had held her captive, a man she was supposed to hate. What was happening to her? After the fight, Kael looked at her, his usual coldness replaced by a raw, complex expression. The moment their eyes locked, the world around them fell away. The scent of blood, the sound of the storm, the groans of the wounded. All of it faded into the background. "You saved me," he stated, his voice a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a puzzle he couldn't solve. It was the first time her curse had been an undeniable, life-saving asset. It proved her value in a way he couldn't ignore, and solidified their bond beyond that of captor and captive. The space between them burned with a new, unspoken energy. They survived the ambush, but the cost was high. 2 of their party were dead, their supplies destroyed. The storm was now upon them, a torrential downpour that soaked them to the bone. They were wounded, alone, and deep in disputed territory. Retreat was impossible. They had lost their support system and had only each other to rely on. Their partnership was no longer a pragmatic alliance. It was something much stronger and more personal. As the silence stretched, the emotional walls between them began to crumble under the immense pressure of their shared desperation. They were two halves of a whole, bound together by a curse, by a common enemy, and by the undeniable, life-saving connection that had just saved them both. Huddled by a small fire, its flames dancing against the rain-slicked rock, Kael tended to a wound on Alara's arm. His touch was unexpectedly gentle, a stark contrast to the Alpha she had known. The intimacy was both a comfort and a complication. She watched him, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands surprisingly deft. He was a king, a warrior, a protector. And in this moment, he was just a man, tending to her wounds, his guard down. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what scared her more, the possibility of dying in this wilderness, or the possibility of falling for the man who had been her captor. The air thickened. The space between them burned with an unspoken truth. The world was cold and dangerous, but in the small circle of firelight, they were safe. They were together. They were a team. And just like that, everything changed. The roar of the waterfall was a cruel, mocking sound. It promised a new beginning, a fresh start, but it was a lie. Alara and Kael found the ancient shrine, hidden in a cave behind the curtain of water. It looked exactly as she had seen it in her visions. The air inside was thick with the scent of old magic and decay, a smell that made her stomach churn. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat of hope and fear. This was it, the end of their long journey. But as they stepped inside, runes on the floor flared to life, a blinding flash of silver light, a magical paralysis field, a trap. They were frozen, their muscles locked in place. Lyra stepped out from behind the central altar, the dagger artifact already in her hand, her face a mask of condescending pity. Her laughter, a cold, sharp sound, echoed through the chamber. It was all a trap. The visions had been bait, a clever lie to lead them here. They had been outmaneuvered. The object of their quest was already in enemy hands. Their hope, a fragile thing, shattered into a million pieces. "Did you really think those whispers were yours?" Lyra mocked, her voice dripping with venom. "Did you really think I would give you the key to my power? You're so naive, little sister." She moved with a predator's grace, her eyes gleaming with a malicious light. The visions were a gift to lead the Alpha King to his doom. Alara's mind was a whirlwind of shock, betrayal, and a gut-wrenching sense of foolishness. She had walked right into the trap, a lamb to the slaughter. She had trusted the visions, the one thing that had been a constant in her chaotic life, and they had betrayed her. She was a pawn, a tool, a stepping stone for Lyra's ambition. The shame was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had not only failed herself, she had led Kael, the man who had protected her, to his death. Lyra began to explain her plan, her voice a chilling monotone. She had used the dagger, the ancient artifact, to amplify and direct the curse, sending Alara the visions she needed to lead Kael here. She needed an Alpha's power to fully activate the shrine and absorb the curse's power into herself. Lyra's warriors emerged from the shadows, their faces grim, their eyes cold. With Kael paralyzed, they easily subdued him, wounding him gravely. Alara could only watch, her body a useless prison. She was filled with a helpless rage, a consuming despair as she saw Kael fall, his blood a dark stain on the stone floor. They were completely defeated. Kael was incapacitated, and Alara was captured by the architect of all her suffering. Hope was extinguished, replaced by a cold, numbing dread. She had failed. They had failed. The world was going to burn. Lyra dragged Alara towards the altar, her grip like a steel trap. "Don't worry, sister," she sneered, her voice a poisonous whisper. "Your part in this is almost over. You will be a vessel, a catalyst for my power. And then you will finally be free. What do you think, little sister? Is that not what you wanted? Ilara's mind screamed in protest. No, this wasn't freedom. This was a cage, a final, brutal imprisonment. She looked at Kael, his eyes, once so full of cold resolve, now dimming with pain and defeat. She saw the life force draining from him, his spirit flickering like a dying candle. She had brought him here. She had sealed his fate. The guilt was a physical weight, a crushing stone on her chest. Lyra placed the dagger on the altar and began the ritual, her chant a low melodic hum that resonated with the ancient power of the shrine. The whispers in Ilara's head screamed, a frantic, chaotic symphony of pain and fear. She watched as Kael weakened, his life force being siphoned away to fuel the curse. She could feel his pain, a dull, throbbing ache in her own chest. She had no goal. This was utter despair. She closed her eyes, wishing for it all to end, finally accepting the misbelief she had fought against for so long. She truly was a worthless burden. Her journey, her hope, her small victories, they were all for nothing. They had only led him to his death. She had failed everyone, including herself. She was a failure. She was a monster. The words were a mantra in her mind, a cold, hard truth she couldn't escape. This was her dark night of the soul. She was at the bottom of a pit of despair, with no hope of escape. She was a ghost, a hollowed-out husk. As Lyra's chant reached a crescendo, a single new voice cut through the chaos in her mind. It wasn't a whisper. It was a statement. A calm, powerful, ancient voice that resonated with a truth that transcended all logic. It was not a voice of anguish, but a voice of power. The blood does not lie. The words were a jolt of ice in the fiery pit of her despair. The blood. Her blood. Lyra's blood. The blood of the wolf. What did that mean? What was this voice? Hope, a tiny defiant spark, flickered in the darkness of her mind. The cold, unforgiving stone of the shrine floor was a stark contrast to the burning fire of betrayal in Ilara's heart. Lyra's face, once a comforting sight, was now a mask of malicious triumph. The dagger in her hand, a thing of ancient, forbidden power, hummed with a dark energy. Kael, her protector, her reluctant partner, was on the ground, his lifeblood seeping into the stone, his pain a raw, visceral thing she could feel in her own chest. She was helpless, a useless prisoner in a body that wouldn't move, a witness to the unraveling of her world. Lyra's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sharp, cruel sound that sliced through the air. "Did you really think those whispers were a gift, little sister?" She mocked, her voice dripping with venom. "Did you really think I would give you the key to my power? You're so naive." She circled Ilara, her movements fluid and predatory. The visions were a gift to lead the Alpha King to his doom. Ilara's mind was a whirlwind of shock, betrayal, and a gut-wrenching sense of foolishness. She had walked right into the trap. She had trusted the visions, the one thing that had been a constant in her chaotic life. And they had betrayed her. She was a pawn, a tool, a stepping stone for Lyra's ambition. The shame was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had not only failed herself, she had led Kael, the man who had protected her, to his death. Lyra, ever the theatric, began her explanation. She had used the dagger to amplify and direct the curse, sending Ilara the visions she needed to lead Kael to the shrine. The plan was to use Kael's power, his life force, to fully activate the shrine and absorb the curse into herself, becoming an all-powerful being. Lyra's warriors, their faces grim, their eyes cold, emerged from the shadows. They easily subdued the paralyzed Kael, wounding him gravely. He was defeated. Hope was a flicker of a dying candle, a ghost in a storm. Ilara felt a helplessness so profound it felt like a physical weight on her chest. "Don't worry, sister," Lyra sneered, dragging Ilara towards the altar. Her grip was like a steel trap. "Your part in this is almost over. You will be a vessel, a catalyst for my power, and then you will finally be free. Is that not what you wanted? Alara's mind screamed in protest. No, this wasn't freedom. This was a cage, a final, brutal imprisonment. She looked at Kael, his eyes, once so full of cold resolve, now dimming with pain and defeat. She saw the life force draining from him, his spirit flickering like a dying candle. She had brought him here. She had sealed his fate. The guilt was a crushing stone. Lyra placed the dagger on the altar and began the ritual. Her chant was a low, melodic hum that resonated with the ancient power of the shrine. Alara's visions, once a chaotic symphony, now screamed, a frantic, dissonant chorus of pain and fear. She watched as Kael weakened, his life force being siphoned away to fuel the curse. She could feel his pain, a dull, throbbing ache in her own chest. She had no goal. This was utter despair. She closed her eyes, wishing for it all to end, finally accepting the misbelief she had fought against for so long. She truly was a worthless burden. Her journey, her hope, her small victories, they were all for nothing. They had only led him to his death. She had failed everyone, including herself. She was a failure. She was a monster. The words were a mantra in her mind, a cold, hard truth she couldn't escape. This was her dark night of the soul. As Lyra's chant reached a crescendo, a single new voice cut through the chaos in her mind. It wasn't a whisper. It was a statement. A calm, powerful, ancient voice that resonated with a truth that transcended all logic. It wasn't a voice of anguish, but a voice of power. The blood does not lie. The words were a jolt of ice in the fiery pit of her despair. The blood, her blood, Lyra's blood, the blood of the wolf. What did that mean? What was this voice? Hope, a tiny, defiant spark, flickered in the darkness of her mind. A deep-seated memory, long buried by fear and trauma, surfaced. A conversation with her grandmother, a healer, before her exile. My dear, our blood holds a secret, a powerful one. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, a forgotten truth now laid bare. The Lycanus and Lunaris lines, they were meant to be one. Alara's eyes flew open, a gasp escaping her lips. Lyra's blood was not just Lycanus. It was part Lunaris. The curse wasn't a simple magical plague. It was a perversion of a powerful ancient bonding ritual, a rite that could only be broken by the union of both bloodlines. Alara was not a worthless burden. She was the key. She wasn't just a vessel for a curse, she was a vessel for a cure. Her blood was not poison, it was the answer. With this revelation, a new vision, a different kind of vision, slammed into her mind. Not a whisper, but a command. She saw a way to break the paralysis field. It was not through force, but through will. She saw the intricate web of energy, the runes on the floor, and she saw the tiny, almost invisible weakness in the pattern. It was a flaw, a subtle but critical vulnerability. It was a loop, a tiny crack in the dam. With every heartbeat, Alara focused, pushing against the paralysis, not with brute strength, but with her mind, with her will, with the newfound power of her blood. She felt a connection to the shrine, a deep, resonating hum. She felt the ancient magic flowing through the stones. She pushed against the weakness in the rune's design, and with a gasp, the paralysis field shattered. She was free. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes locked on Lyra, her former friend, her enemy. Lyra, caught off guard by the sudden breakage of her spell, turned to face her, her face a mask of shock and fury. Lyra's warriors, confused by the sudden change, hesitated. This was Alara's chance. "The blood does not lie, Lyra!" Alara shouted, her voice trembling but with a new power she had never known. "The curse! It's a perversion of a sacred ritual, and I am the key to breaking it!" Alara's words, a mix of truth and raw emotion, hit Lyra like a physical blow. Lyra's mask of condescension cracked, revealing a flicker of raw fear. Alara wasn't just an omega, a pawn. She was a wild card, a threat, a force of nature Lyra had unleashed and could not control. Lyra lunged for the dagger, her eyes wide with panic. Alara knew what she had to do. With her body moving on instinct, her wolf pressing forward, she moved to intercept Lyra. This was not a fight for survival. This was a fight for her people, for Kael, for the man she was beginning to see as her future. This was a fight for the very soul of her world. The fighting was brutal, a whirl of motion, a blur of claws and teeth. Alara was not a warrior, but her body was now a vessel of ancient, forgotten power. She moved with a speed she never knew she had. She was a whirlwind, a force of nature. Lyra, her ambition-fueled strength no match for Alara's true primal power, was thrown back. The dagger, the instrument of her ambition, fell to the floor, its dark energy a silent hum in the air. As her wolf stirred, Alara stood over the dagger, its power thrumming. She knew what it was. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a conduit. It could heal, or it could kill. It could break a curse, or it could unleash a plague. She felt it, clear as day, a choice between revenge and salvation. Lyra was at her feet, defeated. Kael was still on the ground, his lifeblood slowly draining. The fate of both packs, of both their worlds, rested in her hands. The wind carried his name, a faint whisper in the quiet that followed. Kael. Her soul answered. A growl rose in her throat. Her world tilted. Something inside her shifted. The air thickened. Time stood still. What would she do? What would the new queen do with her power? The dagger lay on the ground, a silent question waiting to be answered. The cold, hard stone of the shrine floor was no longer a symbol of defeat. It was a stage. Alara stood over the dagger, its power thrumming like a wild, untamed heartbeat. Lyra, her former friend and now her greatest enemy, was on the ground, defeated. Kael, the man who had been her captor and was now her partner, lay wounded, his life force ebbing away. The fate of their packs, of their two worlds, rested in her hands. She had a choice, a terrible, beautiful choice. She could choose revenge and use the dagger to destroy Lyra, or she could choose salvation and use its power to heal Kael, to break the curse. The wind carried his name, a faint whisper in the quiet that followed. Kael. Her soul answered. It was a clear, undeniable truth. Her heart, once a terrified, frantic drum, was now a steady, resolute beat. A growl rose in her throat. This was not the growl of a monster. It was the growl of a queen, a protector, a healer. Her world tilted. Something inside her shifted. The air thickened. Time stood still. Alara picked up the dagger. Its handle was warm, almost alive, a perfect fit for her hand. Its power flowed through her, a rush of ancient magic that hummed in her veins. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated power. And in that moment, she understood everything. The whispers, the visions, the curse. They were not a weakness. They were a gift. A sacred, ancient gift from her ancestors. A powerful connection to the magic of the land. A magic meant to be shared, not hoarded. She knelt beside Kael, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of her power. She held the dagger over his chest, its glowing blade a beacon of hope in the darkness. She closed her eyes and focused, not on the power, but on the connection, on the bond they had forged in the crucible of their shared struggle. She channeled the magic, a pure white light flowing from the dagger, through her and into him. It was a transfer of energy, a merging of souls, a ritual of healing that transcended all logic. Kael's eyes, once dim and defeated, flared open, a bright, vibrant gold. The wound on his chest, a dark, gaping hole, began to close, the flesh knitting itself together, the blood disappearing into his skin. The curse, a black, viscous tendril of magic, was drawn from him. through Alara and into the dagger where it was consumed, purified, and transformed into a cleansing light. He was healed. He was whole. He was alive. Kael's eyes locked with Alara's, a deep, primal understanding passing between them. He stood, his strength restored, his presence a solid, powerful anchor in the chaotic chamber. He looked at Lyra, defeated on the ground, a shadow of her former self. He looked at Alara, a new light in her eyes, a new power humming in her skin. He spoke, his voice a low, rumbling growl, a sound of authority and reverence. You didn't just break the curse, he said, the awe in his voice a balm to her weary heart. You didn't just heal me. You healed our worlds. Alara, with a single profound gesture, lifted the dagger. The pure, cleansing light it radiated spread throughout the chamber and then out, through the waterfall, into the forest, across the land, a wave of healing magic that cleansed the world of the plague, the sickness, the torment, the whispers. All of it was gone, replaced by a quiet, peaceful hum. And just like that, everything changed. Lyra was no longer a threat. She was a broken, defeated woman. The dagger was no longer a weapon of war, but a tool of healing. The shrine was no longer a trap, but a place of new beginnings. Alara was no longer a burden, a cursed Omega. She was a queen, a healer, a leader. She was the one who had saved them all. In the quiet that followed, Alara and Kael stood together, a silent, powerful unit. The tension, the conflict, the betrayal. It was all in the past. Their shared future stretched out before them, a long, winding road of possibilities. They had faced a common enemy, they had fought a common battle, and they had emerged victorious. They had found in each other not just a partner, but a true, undeniable mate. Their bond was no longer a fragile, nascent thing. It was a powerful, unbreakable, life-giving connection. They walked out of the shrine, into the new dawn. The storm had passed. The sun, a golden orb in the eastern sky, cast its warm, gentle light over the land. The trees, once gnarled and gray, were now a vibrant green. The air, once thick with the scent of decay, was now fresh and clean. The world was new. Their world was new. Their future was new. The story was not over. It was just beginning. It was not a story of curses and betrayal, but a story of hope, of healing, of love. It was a story of two people, from two different worlds, who had found each other, not in peace, but in conflict. Not in love, but in a struggle for survival. And in the end, they had found not just a cure for their world, but a cure for their hearts. Their love story, a fiery, passionate, and deeply emotional journey, had just begun.